everybody. Welcome back to the Mary Project and the Israel Bring Them Home, the Ula Hour with Rabbi Pinchas Winston, Redemption Thursdays. I'm on the cold, very cold, icy streets flying right now, so I'm not going to keep you very long. So thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to check Rabbi Winston's website, 86.org, and find his new Haggadah, which I'm very much looking forward to reading and seeing and learning before Pesach even comes. And I'll explain all that to you. And tonight, the second part is a part of two-part series of the Ten Commandments and the Geulah, redemption. Thank you very much, Rabbi, for joining us. And everybody, like our page and pass it on to all your friends. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Okay, last week we were looking at the mitzvah Tzipis Yeshua based upon what the Sefer Mitzvahs HaKatan, otherwise known as the Smak, explained. We know there's a mitzvah of anticipating the redemption. We know it's an important mitzvah to anticipate redemption. We know we're supposed to wait for Mashiach every day. These are things that are very important to us, especially thousands of years down the road in history. It's not so easy. A lot of people don't do it. Even though we daven Shemona Esrei, we talk about it, staying focused on Gula, especially when the Galus isn't that bad, and so far so good, Baruch Hashem. And things are certainly getting a little more difficult, but not compared to the Holocaust, not compared to Europe in the 1800s and 1700s and 1600s and the Crusades. And I mean, we've never had, as bad as it might be today, it's not nearly as bad as it was for generations of Jews before us. So people stop thinking about it. They stop thinking about Gula because it's not such a necessity from their perspective. But that's not true because of a couple of reasons. One reason is because of the fact that we may be enjoying ourselves, but the Shekhinah, the divine presence, does not like to be in exile. As long as the Jewish people are spread around the world, that's exile for the Shekhinah, for the divine presence. There's no Beis Hamikdash, no temple in Jerusalem for the Shekhinah to be dwelling in. And so it's suffering every single day, all the time, and nothing is worse than suffering and then watching the people around you who are supposed to care about you not suffering together with you. They're, in fact, enjoying themselves, oblivious to what you're going through. So it's not a great thing that Jewish people enjoy themselves when the Shekhinah itself is suffering, but then again, people don't recognize it, don't understand that. And it's all part of anticipating the redemption. It's all part of Tzipis Yeshua. And the Sefer Mitzvahs HaKatan, as Rabbi Yechezkel Levenstein explained in his Sefer, or Yechezkel, in the section called the Musa Gula, that anybody who's not anticipating the redemption is not Mitzvah Yeshua, so they're not properly filling the first of the Ten Commandments, which is such a fundamental. If you're keeping Shabbos, you keep other things, but the fundamental of fundamentals is the first of the Ten Commandments about God and our relationship with Him. So to not be doing that properly is a very not good thing, b'chalal. And so therefore a person really has to be focused on this mitzvah, if only to fulfill that mitzvah properly. But having said that, I wanted to show something to you last week, which we couldn't do because of the communication issues we had, technical problems we had, which I'm going to try to do today. And I'm going to try to put it up, and this is my first time sharing a document through StreamYard. Zoom is easy and Skype is easy, but we'll see if it works for this one as well. In a second, Ms. Hashem, anybody who wants a copy of this can write me, and I'll be happy to send you a PDF file of this particular drawing. Just to begin with, a little history, a little background information. One of the biggest questions of the last 80, 90 years, at least, for the Jewish people at least, has been, was the foundation of the Jewish state in 1948. Was that actually part of the redemption process or not? And what part? So lots of opinions, right? As far as the secular Zionists were concerned, no. They didn't even believe in the idea of redemption in the first place. They were looking for a homeland for the Jewish people to protect them from increased anti-Semitism around the world after what they'd gone through to the Holocaust, and through this before that, going back to Europe and the famous Dreyfus trial in Herzl's time. And then we had the World Zionist Conference, I think two of them, in the end of the 1800s, right before the 1900s. And I mean, the pictures are unbelievable. To get that many Jews in the same room at the same time to discuss such an important issue was itself quite a miracle. And but of course, there was way more than two opinions. But the idea came up, and they were discussing it about going and having a Jewish homeland once again, getting back to Israel. although Uganda was on the table for a little while because the British offered it to the Jewish people with the promise of supporting us there to avoid upsetting the Arabs, because the British and the Arabs have always been buddy-buddy ever since Lawrence of Arabia, if not before that. They've always been way more favorable towards the Arabs and the Jewish people. So they didn't want to really imbalance the Middle East. So they said Uganda, and Herzl was seriously thinking about it, and he died, and that never went through. Not that it would necessarily have been passed, but it wasn't just in serious consideration. Baruch Hashem, that's not where we are. We to go down there to get our hostages, but other than that, we are in Israel. And then when they were discussing the nature of the state that would be in the future, not for another 48 some odd years, if not more, there was an argument, obviously, because the secular Jews, no, they didn't want anything to do with God. This was a secular state, like the rest of the nations of the world, which are religious Catholics and things like that, but put that aside. But they wanted to be secular, no religious aspects. And even when they came down to writing the Constitution, one of the few constitutions, at least in the Western world, that doesn't mention God at all. The closest we got to was the word Sur, the rock, which I guess is something. But the American Constitution mentions God outright, which doesn't make us look so good. But anyway, that was the idea. And of course, the religious world could have nothing to do with that. They could not agree to going back to Israel and making it, at least sanctioning the formation of a secular state, even if in the back of their minds they're thinking, well, one day anyhow we'll turn it around because Mashiach will come, and even before that we can do Kiruv and all that kinds of thing. But they couldn't condone it in any official way, so it broke apart. The conference broke apart, and the secular Zionists went their way, and the religious Zionists went their way, and the rest of the Orthodox world went its way, right? And that's the way it went. And of course, history unfolded from that point onward, the 1900s, and no one saw World War I coming necessarily. I mean, there were signs of it already, but that was a big game changer because also resulted in the Balfour Agreement. It also resulted in the division of the Arab states into Arab states once again. The Ottoman Empire was dismantled, and they formed different Arab countries. And then as time went on, the Arabs took more and more control because oil fields were a major part of it. In the beginning, even though the Arabs were given their own countries, they didn't get control of the oil fields, but that came later on. And of course, the rest we can see for ourselves. And then, of course, 1948, the state was officially proclaimed. And some people mourned the fact that had happened and said it was a Maisa Satan. That was a very small group of people that did that, but it was, if at the very least, there was a difference in the Orthodox world because, again, they couldn't condone a secular state, and the fact that it was being proclaimed a secular state made the Orthodox world very uneasy, uncomfortable. But didn't stop us from going there and building yeshivas and communities and all that, and trying to influence it through our actions, through our lives, which we've been doing for the last 70, 80 some odd years. But in the secular government and people, they really worked on the infrastructure of the country, tremendous mesiras nefesh to build up the country so that we could live here and enjoy all this comfort that we enjoy, all these yeshivas that we're enjoying, and we're able to learn in them. But the kinesias are somebody today are state of the art, and communities, beautiful communities. That's not really the result. I mean, you have today a lot of religious kablanim, contractors and all that, but a lot of the work, initial work, draining the swamps and clearing the land and building things up was the result of the secular government, really of Hashgacha Pratis, working through the secular government. But regardless, the country did go forward as a secular state, and the religious community sort of kept to itself. The famous meeting of the Chazon Ish with David Ben-Gurion, basically claiming to the prime minister that, hey, we've been around a lot longer than you have, so we're not concerned. We'll keep doing our thing, and you'll do yours, I guess, and we'll see what happens after that. It didn't actually work out the way we planned, but it did work out relatively well, in as much as we were able to grow as a Torah community all over the land, Baruch Hashem, and the country is relatively traditional according to most surveys that I've seen. It doesn't look that way because, of course, just like in America and other countries, the left has the biggest mouth and control of all the communication outlets for the most part. The religious ones, the right ones, they also may be powerful, but not as powerful. And so it gives the impression that the guy who screams the loudest in the room gets the most attention, basically. And that's what it's been like. But the country overall, thank God, Baruch Hashem, has a lot of Yiddishkeit on different levels in it, in preparation for Mashiach to come and fix everything up. But again, the question became, does 1948 represent the beginning of the final redemption, or even well into the final redemption? After the Holocaust, for sure, a lot of people thought that was the case. Religious Zionists, of course, jumped all over it and said yes, and they brought all kinds of proofs for it. Not out of nowhere, not just out because they wanted to, but they had a lot of Torah proofs, a lot of things to base their opinion on. And they took it to such an extent that they actually began to celebrate as a holiday. Yom HaSmud is a religious holiday, or not I say religious, but it's a significant holiday in the religious Zionist world, to the point people say Hallel with a bracha too, right? That's controversial in other circles, but not in theirs. So and then of course you have the secular Zionists who still, we don't care, they're doing their own thing, right, as far as they're concerned. And then you have the rest of the religious world that certainly in the beginning, that pashnish. That's not, the contrary, might be a stumbling block, might be an ikuv to the final redemption. And I'd made this point before. I'm not going to dwell on it again right now, but everyone knows the famous expression that the Lord works in mysterious ways, and certainly when it comes to Jewish history, that has been the case. I mean, how many times have we missed the point? How many times have we overlooked the truth because we went by what our eyes saw on the surface from the obvious thing? Yosef's brothers sell him into slavery. David HaMelech's family reject him. Evan Masa Boinim, Hai Sela Rosh Pina. How many times do we have to say that pasuk before it finally resonates and goes to our hearts and teaches us that it's so easy for the builders, and builders is a very important term. It means like the fundamental, pillars of the society, from society, right? How they can mistake what God values the most. Obviously, now when it comes to Torah, now when it comes to mitzvahs, psach halach, and things like that, that's all tradition. That's who we depend upon. But in terms of the hashgacha, the divine providence of things, Jewish history is a mystery. It's convoluted, very convoluted. So I'm not going to go into that right now, but that was the question. That was the question that many people were left with. What do you do with 1948? Now, I'm not going to say that what I'm about to show you proves the point, because I can't. It's absolutely remarkable. I mean, I think I didn't need this to believe already what I believe. But certainly, maybe that's one of the reasons is I do believe it. That's why I'm so excited about it. But the main thing for me is hashgacha pratis. The main thing for me is, how much can you say this is a miracle? How much can you say, statistically, this is not likely to be random, and therefore overt hashgacha pratis. Me'es Hashem ha'isa zos he nifas beineni. We can throw psukim around all day to back up the points. This is from God, that which is wondrous in our eyes. Is this wondrous in our eyes? Well, 2 + 2 is not so wondrous. But as you add things, it becomes more complex. If a professor stands in front of a big whiteboard and puts on a very simple equation on the board, that you're used to, doesn't excite you, right? And then he starts building around it and adds this and adds that, and the thing becomes a whole whiteboard full of equation based upon the original small little equation that got built into it, and you stand back and you go, "Wow, that's amazing." That's when you see that larger picture, it's amazing. So when I show you this diagram right now, that's really what we're looking at over here. There is just such a tremendous amount of hashgacha pratis, just way more than a person can look at and say, well, yeah, maybe, but that doesn't. It does. It does. So let me try and present it and see if I can get it to share the screen. Okay. Share screen. Use operating system settings. Allow. I hope this doesn't cancel the whole show. Okay, where's the screen I'm looking for here? 1 second. Can you see this diagram? No? What do you see? Nothing? I'll share this window. Okay. Now? You still can't see? What do you see?
Just you.
It's me. There's
Like right
nothing.
here.
I'm supposed to share the screen. Hold on. Let me try it. Actually, it's not even the screen I want to share. Stop sharing. Where is the diagram? Okay, I may just have to describe it to you instead. Okay. If we were using Zoom, this would be very simple to do. Where's StreamYard? Try that again. Where is the... Where's the diagram? I'm not sure this is going to be worse in the end. Well, actually, you know what? I'll hold it up instead. So excuse me for 1 second. I'm back. Fortunately, I have it printed out as well. Okay, this is the diagram. Okay, and I'll have to explain it piece by piece to you. And as I said, anybody who wants to copy this is welcome to let me know, and I'll be happy to send it to you. Okay, what you're looking at over here, the top, okay, you'll see the Hebrew to the left side of the page, top left side of the page there. The very, very, very top Hebrew is just a quote where it comes from Yeshaya in chapter 60, verse 22. And that he's talking about the final redemption, and he quoting Hashem, he says, Ani Hashem bi'ita achishena. I am Hashem, it is time, I will hasten it. Now, what does that mean? So the Gemara says that it means that there are two possible times for Mashiach to arrive. Earlier or the last possible moment. History can only go on for so long, according to tradition, according to Kabbalah, even though some people like to say that's not true, that it's only a few opinions. Wrong. It is an absolute 6,000 years. Yeah, there are dissenting opinions, but no one from the world of Kabbalah, no one from the world who knows about spheres and history, the way it's supposed to unfold. It's the same way. It's like saying that you might live until 85, or you might live until 255. Maybe. How do you know you won't? Because your DNA, there's nothing in your body that will allow you to do that. It's just built in. You're gonna and whether you keep your hair, lose your hair, or whatever, however you grow it as you get older, that's all DNA. That's the DNA of history, 6,000 years. But anyhow, the point is that there's a bitah. A bitah means there is a last possible moment by which Mashiach has to come. Achishena means I will hasten it. So from the simple reading of the verse, it's talking about one time. God's saying that the final redemption, the final time that Mashiach history has to come to a conclusion is fixed, but it can come a little bit earlier. I moved it up. That final time is moved up. It's like the deadline used to be February 5th. Now it's February 4th instead. You moved it up. That is the deadline. It's earlier. Same thing. Of course, Baruch moved the deadline. The Gemara says no. It's talking about two possible times, that either we can do tshuva and fix the world on our own, and no longer require any more tikkun or any more serious tikkun, and therefore Mashiach will come because the world's ready for him early, today, tomorrow, whatever the case may be, right? Or we don't do the tshuva. The world continues on the path it is on right now, where people are going about their lives and living from day to day, and the world's not doing what it has to fix up, in time for Mashiach to arrive, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu lets it go, giving us more time for free will and more time for free will, and until we get to that point where he says, that's it, no more, game's over. I gave you guys an ample, opportunity. What about all the work that needs to be done? So that's the war of Gog and Magog. That's when the war of Gog and Magog becomes essential, because Hashem will bring that war to finish off through whatever it causes people to do and act and be impacted. It will take care of the balance of what has to happen in advance of Mashiach's arrival. So that's the way the Gemara looks at it, but the Lashon explains it still has to come back to the original Pshat, and that is that the final redemption, even if it comes at the last possible moment, it won't be the last possible moment, but one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu anticipated, of course, and a little bit earlier. So those are the main psukim. Now, I'm pretty sure at some point in time I worked out the gematria of those words, because they're important. If you're into Kabbalah, if you're into gematria, into looking for simani, you're into geula, part of Sipis Yeshua, you're into all that stuff. So you're always looking for connections. It's just not an automatic thing. There's books about gematrias and codes and all. It's a normal thing in that type of a world. So I don't remember doing it, but I was contacted. Now here's where some of the hashgacha pratis come. You need to keep track of the hashgacha pratis, because it's not just the numbers that count here. It's also the events that led to the discovery and discussion of these things. So I have a chavrusa. I live with somebody by way of Skype who lives in the north. He lives in the north of Eretz Yisrael. We don't get to see each other in person very often, but we learn twice a week through Skype. And he was the one who told me about a certain Rav who had worked at the gematria of these two numbers, right? And of Abita, and the gematria, that's the 477. To the right of that is the gematria of Abita, and below that is 374. That's the gematria of the word Ahishana. No kola, straight Gemara, just add up the letters the way they are. Okay. So if you add up the total, then the number is 851. 477 plus 374 is 851. Immediately the number meant something to me, because 850 is a huge important number. Also the Gula picture, as Rashi points out in Chumash, the Gemara points, really Gemara. Gemara says that when Hashem says, when Hashantam, I think in Parshas V'eschanan, about the Jewish people, that you live in the land and grow old, and you'll go away from me eventually at some point in time, and I'll be forced to exile you. I forget the exact lashon of the verse, but it uses the word V'noshantam. And the gematria V'noshantam, as the Gemara points out, and Rashi brings down, is 852. And the reason why this is important, because if we had gotten to the point of 852, then Hashem would have been forced to destroy the Jewish nation. But he didn't want to do that. So instead, he exiled us to Babylonia 2 years earlier, in 850. So 850, 851, that was kind of significant, and but it's off by one, but still that's so close. And is there any but what's the conceptual connection? Not really a whole lot. Nothing really to make a big deal about. You point it out, make it the Var Torah, the Sheva Baruch or something like that. But it's not yet anything that's important. But unbeknownst to me, but not to this rabbi, that I always thought that the Jewish state was declared on May 5th, 1948, because that's the date that they always throw around. Yom Ha'atzmaut, of course, is the 5th of Iyar, right, every year, which is the 20th day of the Omer. And it's an amazing thing, by the way, because that they didn't choose a secular date for Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's pretty significant that they use a Jewish date, because it's always the same day every year, not in the non-Jewish calendar, but the Jewish calendar, which is Hashgacha Pratis for sure. But that's the date it's always, when it's a Cheder, that's the date they talked about. Yom Ha'atzmaut was on that day. That's Israel Independence Day. No one talks about November 29th, 1947. I mean, it does in Wikipedia, it does in history books the year before. Why is it so important? Well, I didn't realize that, but that's when the vote took place. The actual UN vote to decide, and Harry Truman, of course, there's this whole divine providence of Harry Truman, how he came to office, the only one in the entire American government, and one of the few people in America who would have fought on behalf of the Jewish people. One reason because he was very close to a certain Jew who called him up and said, "Please fight on behalf of the Jewish people." And he bent arms to get people to vote in the UN in favor of Israel because they weren't going to. They weren't going to. It was going to be unanimous. The State Department didn't want it. Marshall, he was against it completely because he knew it was going to upset the balance in the Middle East. And I think to this very day that the U.S. State Department has never officially accepted Israel as an independent country. He was furious at Truman because of this, right? And yet he did it. He was a Bible-carrying president who believed that this was the fulfillment of a prophecy from Parsha Kisavo about the Jewish people suffering terribly and then eventually coming back to their land. He wanted to be a part of that. Amazing in modern American politics. But it was only because FDR was in for a fourth term, changed his running mate for that fourth term to Truman from the other guy, I forget his name, right? And because World War II took place and Harry Truman was, he made a name for himself during World War II, so therefore he brought him in, I guess, to be more popular, and then he died 3 months into office, and that allowed Truman to become president and do everything that Truman did in the end, including ending the war. But this is what he felt. He fought on behalf of the Jewish people. And that vote took place not on May 5th. That's when it was officially announced in the UN. Months later, I guess all the paperwork that had to be drawn up and all the different things that had to be worked out. You just don't declare a state, and next day, there it is, especially if you have all this backlash anticipated. But it was on November 29th, 1947, that the actual vote took place when they decided to let Israel be an official state. Now, the non-Jewish date is not nearly significant as the Hebrew date. And the Hebrew date, you'll see just above the blue text underneath the pink text there is a date. Tes Zayin Kislev, and Kislev is spelled with a Yud. It's supposed to be spelled with a Yud. We mostly do the Yud out, but as I made note over there, it's Zechariah and Nehemiah that appears with the Yud. You actually should write it with a Yud, but one of the reasons why is because it was also Aramaic. And because it was Aramaic, so that the Yud belongs in there, and it's not there to do Hanukkah. But we'll talk about that hopefully again by Hanukkah time as well. Hashem. And the year, of course, was Tafshin Ches, which is 5708. We don't write the Hay ever. We're not writing the Hay today. We haven't, we never write the millennium. Since the millennium only changes once every 1,000 years, no one ever gets confused about which Jewish millennium it is. This is the sixth millennium, 5,000 and something. So and it's just easier. Once in a while, you see some put the hay in there, but almost never. So we write down Tafshin Ches and said, this rabbi, I wouldn't have done that. I certainly wouldn't have done that. And if my friend hadn't seen it all the way up in Ma'alot in the north, I would even know about it because it wasn't published anywhere. But he happened to be there when it was being given over. He happened to tell me about it because we learned together. And it turned out that the gematria of that date is 850. So again, 850 is significant because of the fact that that's how many years we were in Eretz Yisrael the first time before we got kicked out and put into exile. I mean, it's very peculiar, such a huge number. It would show up twice in history like that. There's got to be some kind of significance. But again, depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to believing people who want to believe, they'll buy it in 2 seconds. If you're talking to people who have a difficult time believing it, because they don't know the statistics. You'd have to, if you did the statistics of that happening, still people will have a difficult time believing that it's anything special to bank on, so to speak. Anyhow, moving forward, right? But it's still off by one. Bita Achishan is 851. This is 850. Close, very close. And for the record, you should know that in Kabbalah, it can happen. First of all, we have a concept called kolel. I'm not sure kolel, where you add one for the word or two, but there's two words here. Or do you, depends what you go by. There are different rules, different programs, different ways of doing gematria. Some of which, if you don't believe in the divine source of Kabbalah that came from God and through Moshe and all that, you'd have a difficult time with some of these gematrias. Some of them are very, very wild. You wouldn't teach them to beginners, not even to intermediates. They would balk at them. But it's possible. But again, if you're talking to people, you're trying to convince them this is important, They're going to say, one? Okay, it's amazingly close. Statistically, that it's, the odds that they're, being only off by one, that it's not seen, are, again, it's very slim, but still people want perfection. They want to know, that everything works out the way it should, to be able to conclude what they want to believe in. So now the truth is, I don't think the rabbi had a problem with this. 851, 850 for him, he's a believer. I think he's even a dayan in Haifa, but he, close enough to at least share with people that they can enjoy it as well. You're not going to go on to the UN and say, you see, this proves that God gave the land to us, and you're all wrong. You're not going to go to the secular, government or to the left and say, you better change your ways. This proves that God gave the land back to Jewish people for the sake of Gula, and you make a big mistake. That's not going to work like that, right? They're not going to buy into it. But to people around you who already learn Torah, and they believe and they understand Gematria, they're going, wow, it's amazing. They get hana, they get pleasure, they get chizuk, strength. They get encouraged by it. But again, we want more. We want more. Now, he stopped there. That's where he stopped. Now, the thing is that, is that 2 weeks before this happened, somebody asked me a question to do with a sefer called Tuva Arts. Now, Tuva Arts itself is a story to itself. Tuva Arts means the goodness of the land, written by Rav Nosson Shapiro in the 1600s. He was the Rav of Krakow, Poland, and then made Aliyah to Israel, which is a whole different country at that time, much poorer. And he became pretty much immediately, his father himself was a Gadol Hador also, but he came to Jerusalem. He became the Rav of Yerushalayim. And there was so much poverty, he went to Europe to try to collect money for the Yishuv. And while he was there in Italy, I think specifically, they had just found the manuscripts of Reb Chaim Vital, the number one student of the Arizal. He had hidden them in Damascus. They found them, and now they were trying to organize them, and they brought them to Italy, which was a big center of Kabbalah at that time, to go through them, and they eventually became the Kisvei Arizal. We call the writings and the works of the Arizal. And different people have tried to reorganize them. There's certain disagreements as to what comes first and then like that, and some things were left out, but what we have is quite amazing and pretty authoritative. But Rav Nosson Shapiro, he became ill and was unable to go back to Israel. So he got to these Mekubalim, and they gave him a section to work with, which basically dealt with Eretz Israel, the more Kabbalistic, Midrashic type aspects of the Rizal's writing to do with Eretz Israel. And he collated them and put them to a sefer. His starting paragraph at the beginning is, what I'm going to tell you is not from me. It's the Arizal, which is pretty remarkable because not all of it sounds like the Arizal, but that's what he says. You have to take his word for it. And in that sefer, he describes remarkable things. And actually, I was so inspired by it that I actually wrote a book called Talking About Eretz Yisrael, based upon things I discovered for myself in that sefer. Now, I only know about that sefer because at that time, I was sharing my office with a friend. And he had seen this name, Rav Nosson Shapiro, pop up in several different places, and he knows a lot of names of Rabbanim. He didn't recognize it. So he did a little research, and he found out that his name is mentioned often in his time, and he's a big Talmid Chacham. And so he did some more research. He found out that he'd written some Sforim, one of which was Tuva Aretz, but wasn't available, disappeared. And he went to Hebrew University, and sure enough, he found it in microfiche. Microfiche, it's like teensy, weensy little letters. And you usually put it under, some type of, magnifying glass to expand it and to project it. And he decided on his own to republish a sefer. While he was working in my office, he was working for this microfiche. It was painful to watch him do it, but he did it. And I was one of the first people to buy a sefer from when it was finally published. And it was a game changer for me. Tremendous game, and I used it, and I've used it to this very day. It's one of these main resources that I rely upon for a lot of things to do with Eretz Israel, especially in the Messianic era. And otherwise, I wouldn't have known about the Sefer. It wouldn't have come across my desk. I wouldn't have heard about it. It's not so famous today, but he did it. I got it, and I used it. But over time, I put it aside for other things. I would go back for different sections of it that I remembered, but you forget things after a while. And I forgot one particular point that I only remembered because somebody asked me a question about something else. And in the process of looking for I knew it was somewhere in Tuvartz, the answer to his question. But in the process of looking for his answer, I came across a paragraph of something else that at the time I didn't really mean that much to me because that wasn't the question. And it was significant, but I just filed away temporarily. Had it been 3 weeks later, maybe even 4 weeks later, I might have forgotten it. But it was only 2 weeks later that this thing came up, right? And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting, okay, because it says the following thing. I'll read the English translation of it. Prayer does not ascend to heaven until every Jew has prayed. As collectively, prayer goes to Shemaim on behalf of the, not individual prayers go one after the other, like, just shoot up the sky like little individual rockets. No, we daven, we pray, they get collected together, and when they all get collected together, so then they go up to Shemaim as a group. I'm not exactly sure what that means because minyan, but that's what it says, okay? But the actual time goes after the Yishuv. That is the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. Since Eretz Yisrael is the place where all Jews belong, not just they live, but belong. So even when we're not all there, it's still the focal point. It's still it's still the international dateline, so to speak, for the Jewish people. History is what it says is therefore recorded according to Eretz Yisrael time. That's from Tuvartz. And I remembered that when I saw this, and I learned about the vote on Tez Zayin Kislev. So I thought to myself, well, let's take a look. Let's see when the vote actually took place. Because if it took place in the morning, nothing to talk about, right? Because 9:00 in the morning in New York, which is where the UN was, right? 9:00 in the morning is only 4:00 in the afternoon, maybe even 3:00. Maybe something could be 5:00. But if it's still before sundown in Eretz Yisrael, it's the same day as the rest of the world. So I took a look, and I didn't expect this at all because I would think that this type of thing would take place early in the day for some reason. But it turns out that the actual vote went through at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in New York. So the first thing I did was look up sundown for that day, because if sundown had already occurred, then even according to it was even better. But if it didn't occur, then it was possible that it was the 16th of Kislev in New York, but the 17th of Kislev in Eretz Yisrael, where we go after. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it turns out that 5:30 p.m. was before sundown on November 29th, the 16th of Kislev, but it was already 12:30 a.m. in Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael, which means it was already after, it was 17th of Kislev. Anyhow, 5:30 in the afternoon, in New York, that doesn't take very long for it to be here. It's already for sure at that day, even earlier. It really could have been, if sundown that day was like, let's say, well, no, that's a side point. The main thing is that it turns out that according to New York time, it was the 16th of Kislev, but according to Eretz Yisrael time, which we go after, it was the 17th of Kislev, and you add one more to the 850, and all of a sudden it equals 851. So it turns out the Gematria Achishena Bita, the words that describe the final redemption, equal in Gematria, without any funny stuff, exactly the Gematria of Yud Zayin Kislev Taf Shin Ches. Statistically, given all the factors that went into to put this together, to bring it all together, different people, different svarim, different things, different times, different hashkacha pratis. If anybody knows how to calculate statistics of things like this, I'd like to know. But I haven't done it myself. But just thinking about it, it's just already, you can see too many things that could have not gone the way they did that would have changed everything, or at least certainly made it a lot less auspicious. But someone could still ask the question, so what? It's the UN vote. What do we care? I mean, obviously the world does, and the secular government certainly does. But like you see, the Orthodox Jews, they don't really care that much what the UN has to say. Who gave them the power? It's not God-given power that they decide who's a country and who's not. We know Eretz Israel is our Medina. It's our country. It's our place. It's our homeland. It's our biblical birthright, etc., etc. So the UN votes in favor, votes against. What do we care? Okay, it might cause problems politically and and demographically, but why give such chashivas, such importance to the entire thing? It's just the UN. So another piece of hashgacha pratis. If you didn't learn a kol Torah, and many people won't because they think it's controversial, they think it's not by the Vilna Gaon, and there are even big people with big names who feel that way as well. But most of the material someone thoughtfully cross-referenced in other works of the Vilna Gaon that we do know that he wrote, and others for him that clearly indicate that he was involved in this type of thing the entire time. But in kol Torah, this is a very important thing, and it's so grosh. It's so much the Vilna Gaon. You just incredibly. It's hard to say it's not. The problem was like this: Kol Torah was never meant to be a sefer, not for the public. Kol Torah, which means the voice of the turtle dove, based upon the 7th verse of the 2nd chapter of Shir Shirim, which talks about the final redemption, and it talks about the buds budding or the plants budding, and the voice of the turtle dove. These are all signs of the Gula. So the Gra, chose that, or someone chose that his name. Well, he did actually for this material, but it was mostly material that he put together to give over to his Talmidim, who he was training. We know this, to go to Eretz Israel. Now, Eretz Israel in the 1700s, and certainly towards the end of the 1700s, was nothing. It was still under the Ottoman Empire at that time. It was barren. It was desert. There wasn't much going on there. Nations tried to conquer, but they couldn't plant it. That's why it's called the Green Line, because what we planted miraculously grew, like the prophecy said. That's a different story to itself. But the another say for the Gra, but the place was just barren. I mean, there were Arabs and marauders and nomads, and people live in the desert with the camels and all that, but not much else besides that. And in 5500, the Vilna Gaon, he decided, based upon the Zohar, that it was time to now start focusing on kibbutz galius, ingathering the exiles, and rebuild the Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So he focused on that tremendously, trained many Talmidim, with Hillel Mishkalov, and streets are named after him, and in different places in Yerushalayim, and they went. Tremendous self-sacrifice, terrible conditions, like life-threatening conditions with their wives and children, on the command of the Gra, to go build. He himself was on the way, but he turned back. But to build up the Yishuv, here we are today. I mean, they started, for the most part, everything that we're enjoying here today in Eretz Yisrael. They were the beginnings of it. That's why all the streets are named after them. And in Kol Torah, that was the material, the ideas he gave over to them to help them understand what was going on, the importance of the time, and how what they were doing was biblical in terms of trying to bring Mashiach. Basically, it's how to participate on the level of Mashiach ben Yosef, which is why the Sitra Achra doesn't like it, because that's something so proactive, that we can expedite redemption. That was the point of the book. And in that book, he explains, based upon psukim from Shir Shirim, which is a huge source of verses for the final redemption. So he explains over there that if the Jewish people don't merit the redemption, achishena, to do it the proper way with tshuva, then it has to come with the permission of the kings of the world. This is the 1700s. There's no UN in sight. There's not even a League of Nations yet, right? There's no unanimity at this point in the world. There's still empires, conquering empires, and the Industrial Revolution is going to come along soon, and people become more self-focused and building up themselves. But there's still lots of wars to come, lots of conquering to go on. World War I was just another extension of the idea of conquering empires, taking over pieces of land. World War II, for that matter, too. But he says, if we don't merit the proper way, then you're going to have to get the, what's the proof? Or at least what's an example of this? Koresh, Cyrus, he was the one during the Babylonian exile to give permission to the Jewish people to go back and start rebuilding the temple. He conquered Babylonia. He was Median. He conquered Babylonia in 3390, 52 years into the exile, and gave the Jews permission to go back and start rebuilding the Yishuv and the Beis Hamikdash. Remarkable, absolutely remarkable. So much so that the Gemara Megillah refers to him at first as Mashiach ben Yosef, but it can't because he's not Jewish, right? But then it says that the Ruach of Mashiach ben Yosef was in him to do this. But when the Jewish people didn't respond, or at least as the Vilna Gaon says, that was all that was meant to happen until that point in time to get things started, but not finish it off. So then he rescinded. But he was the one. And there's a beautiful story, which again, I just happened to stumble over. I randomly found it. We don't believe in randomness, but I happened to looking for something completely different. But you Google something, and Google Books provided me with an excerpt that had a keyword in it from one of Truman's aides, a book that he wrote after about his working for Truman, and he describes how after the state was formed, after the War of Independence, I believe, when Truman was now retired, and Chief Rabbi Gorin from Eretz Yisrael came to meet with the president and to give him something, or reward him with something, to thank him so much for the work he did on behalf of the Jewish people. And he says to President Truman, he says, no, what the president has done that is on par with what Cyrus did in his time. And Truman, being the Bible-believing, Bible-carrying president that he was, to the point that people thought he was obsessed with it, that that would mean something to him. But the aide thought that the rabbi was just being over-complimentary, schmaltzy, so, to put it, very plainly. And he said, but I looked over at the president and I saw that he had tears running down his eyes. And he said to Chief Rabbi Gorin, he said, do you really think that God looks at what I've done here for the Jewish people on par with what Cyrus has done? And the president and the chief rabbi said, there's a special place for the president in heaven because of what he's done. And he said, I think the aide ends up by saying, the president said it was the best day of his life. To hear that, that's how important it was. I mean, incredible. These are shkacha pratis that people don't know about. It's the big picture. You put it all together, it just means so much. One piece over here, one piece over there, one piece. It doesn't talk to you. It's like, it's a small little detail, small fact. If only it was true. But you put it all together. Wow. The picture creates unbelievable. And so according to the Gra, the UN vote is hugely important. In fact, there was no other way to get the state back at that stage of history. And I say state, the country, our homeland, to get it back, except with the permission of the nations of the world. And that was the only way to do it. It was the only place to get it. That's officially accepted as the place that the world speaks and decides for the whole world, at least for those who listen to and obey it. And the Brisker Rav, I believe, was quoted as saying that the UN only came into existence for that one vote. Clearly what it did after that hasn't been so fair, but that one vote. And when you consider that what went into making that vote, to get that vote to pass in favor of the Jewish people, it doesn't make sense. You can only explain it in terms of hashgacha pratis. I can't tell you with 100% certainty for you. For myself, I can. The same way, I can't prove to you that God exists 100%. God made it that way. That I can't prove it to you. I can prove it to myself. I can prove to myself, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God exists, because I'm allowed to. That's my avoda. That's what I'm supposed to do. You can do that. If you do the work, you can do it. You can be so certain, but it's not my job to make you believe 100%. I can inspire you, but you have to yourself believe that. Same thing. I can't tell you with 100% certainty that God put all this together and said to say, guys, 1948, I gave you back the land. It's the beginning of the final redemption, or the middle of the final redemption. But it's all part of the final redemption. I can't convince you 100%. I'm 100% convinced, without a doubt. That's my personal opinion. I think it's very well based. And that's why I was going today. And this, by the way, is only one part of the picture. We haven't gone through the whole thing yet. Maybe next week we'll go some more of it. I've done it before in the past. There's background information to this. There's other things going on independent of this that corroborates this and very powerful too. And you put it all together, to not, Reb Dessler was quoted as saying, listen, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he was basically saying that whether or not you believe this is part of the redemption, or is it does not change the fact that it was a God-given gift, that God arranged it to give it to us. And anybody who doesn't appreciate the divine providence in getting back the land and what it means, that's not a random thing, will have to answer for it later on. So, anyhow, we should be zoiche, we should merit to see the end of this process already on behalf of the Jewish people. Finally, to be able to solve all the problems, return back to Kodesh Baruch Hu, get back the entire land. All the Jews come home and want to come home, not to have to be forced and dragged, by their hands or whatever circumstances, but willingly want to come home and love the idea to come home, and they wish we zeicha to be here to rebuild and complete. I mean, the place is beautiful. What they've done with the place is unbelievable. Again, hashgacha pratis, physical workers, right? People doing, but Hashem organizing and orchestrating. It's absolutely amazing what's happened in 80 years. But we still don't have everything we're supposed to have. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. And that's a big hole in the entire picture. Because when we get that, then we get the Shechina back there. So the Galus for the exile for the Shechina will finally end. And that's the end of the story. That's the beginning. That's the real, we're in the Messianic era now, but that's the real Yemos HaMashiach, the real Messianic era. We should be zeichet to see that. All the hostages, it will be a thing of the past, because it'll all be home. Whoever's remaining, and whatever, the situation, will finally be over, God willing, again, in favor of the Jewish people. And we'll finally be able to look back and see how everything fit together and enjoy Torah and mitzvahs that we were supposed to with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Shabbat Shalom.